They fired her over one drop of water, not spilled on a man, not on a contract, just a single drop on a table. And yet the room turned cold, the smiles disappeared, and the truth surfaced. Naomi Brooks stood there in her black apron, her hands shaking, listening as a powerful man insulted her in a language he was certain she couldn't understand. He didn't see a woman. He didn't see intelligence. He saw a black waitress he believed was invisible. But something inside Naomi snapped. Years of swallowing disrespect, years of being underestimated, years of carrying brilliance in silence. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Naomi understood every word he said, and the moment she decided to speak back would cost her everything and change everything. Stay with this story, because the next thing that happens will leave a billionaire frozen in shock and turn a single insult into a reckoning no one saw coming. Naomi Brooks learned very early in her life how to become invisible. Not the kind of invisible that made you safe, but the kind that let people look through you as if you were part of the furniture. The kind reserved for black women wearing uniforms in places built for white wealth. The kind that meant you could stand inches away from power and still be ignored. On a cold Tuesday evening in River North, Chicago, Naomi tied the strings of her black apron behind her back and took a slow breath before stepping onto the dining floor of Blackwood Prime. One of those restaurants that didn't need a sign because everyone who mattered already knew where it was. The air smelled like truffle oil, aged wine, and entitlement. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Laughter was low, controlled, expensive. Naomi was 26 years old. She was black, she was exhausted, and she carried more than $100,000 in student debt on her shoulders like a second spine. She also held a master's degree in linguistics, but no one here needed to know that. "Table 12 is here," Stephen Caldwell snapped from behind the service station. Stephen was the general manager, a man whose smile widened in direct proportion to a guest's net worth. "Richard Hale, private room? Don't mess this up." Naomi's fingers tightened around the water pitcher. Richard Hale, CEO of Hale Industries Group, a man whose name moved markets and ruined careers with the same casual flick of a pen. She had heard the stories. Servers fired for breathing too loudly, chefs humiliated over minor delays, a man who treated money like oxygen and people like background noise. "Be a ghost," another server whispered as Naomi passed. "That's how you survive him." Naomi nodded. She had perfected ghosthood. The private dining room was quieter than the rest of the restaurant, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, tailored suit sharp enough to cut. Beside him was Daniel Whitmore, his longtime executive partner, flipping through documents with a furrowed brow. Naomi approached with her practiced, careful steps. She poured water for Daniel first, then she moved toward Richard. The pitcher was cold in her hands. Condensation slid down her fingers. She tilted it slowly, precisely. A single cube of ice shifted. It fell. A tiny splash escaped the rim of the glass. One drop of water landed on the dark wood table. Not on him, not on his papers. Just a single, harmless drop. Time froze. Richard Hale stopped speaking. His eyes followed the drop as if it had committed a crime. He looked up at Naomi, not with anger, but with something worse, contempt. "Stephen," he said loudly without taking his eyes off her. The door flew open. Stephen rushed in, pale and sweating. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" "This," Richard said, gesturing toward Naomi like she was a malfunctioning appliance, "is unacceptable. I'm negotiating a billion-dollar deal, and I'm interrupted by incompetence." "I'm so sorry, sir," Naomi said quietly. Stephen lunged forward, pulling out a pristine white handkerchief and dabbing the table as if it were contaminated. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Hale. This will be handled immediately." Handled. Naomi had heard that word before. Richard leaned back in his chair and switched languages without hesitation. He spoke Arabic, fast and sharp, his voice low and venomous. He assumed, as men like him always did, that the black waitress in front of him could not possibly understand. "This is what happens when they let people like her do professional jobs," he said. "Clumsy, empty-headed, probably can't even read." Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Naomi stood perfectly still. Her heartbeat slowed. Something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Years of swallowed frustration, of being overqualified and underpaid, of watching classmates with half her talent leap ahead while she memorized wine lists and smiled through microaggressions. Years of being underestimated because of her skin, her uniform, her silence. Richard added one last line in Arabic, dismissive and cruel. "Get her out of my sight." Stephen cleared his throat. "Naomi, go to my office, now." She didn't move. Richard had already turned back to his papers, his reality complete without her. Naomi lifted her chin. "Sir," she said calmly in flawless, unaccented Arabic, "your assumption is incorrect." The room went dead. Stephen froze with his hand on the door. Daniel's head snapped up. Richard Hale didn't turn at first. His body stiffened, as if his brain refused to process what it had just heard. Naomi continued, her voice steady, precise. "I am not empty-headed. I can read. I can read the financial reports on your table. I can read classical poetry, and I can read your character, which you have just revealed." Richard turned slowly. The color drained from his face. Stephen sputtered. "What do you think you're doing?" Naomi switched back to English, her tone calm but unyielding. "Mr. Hale insulted me in Arabic, assuming I was too ignorant to understand him." Stephen laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous. Mr. Hale—" "She's not mistaken," Richard said quietly. Stephen's world tilted. You speak Arabic?" "I have a master's degree in linguistics," Naomi said, "and I'm done pretending I'm invisible." Stephen's fear turned into rage. "You're fired," he shouted. "Insubordination. Get out." Naomi untied her apron slowly, carefully. She folded it and placed it on the table. She met Richard Hale's eyes one last time. "Have a good evening." Then she walked out. Outside, the cold Chicago air hit her like reality. She was unemployed. Her rent was due. Her loans were relentless. And yet, for the first time in years, she stood upright. She had spoken. And somewhere behind her, in a room full of power and money, a man realized the person he had just dismissed was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Before we continue, this was only the beginning of Naomi Brooks' story. She lost her job, but did she really lose? Now I want to ask you, have you ever stayed silent to survive when speaking up felt too risky? Yes or no? Answer honestly. Your voice matters here. Naomi Brooks walked for 6 blocks before the adrenaline wore off. The city didn't notice her. Chicago never did. The lights still glowed. Taxis hissed past on wet pavement. Laughter spilled out of bars where people argued about wine prices instead of rent. By the time she reached her garden-level apartment on West Ohio Street, the anger that had carried her out of Blackwood Prime collapsed into something heavier. Fear. She sat on the edge of her second-hand couch and stared at the wall, the silence ringing in her ears. Her phone buzzed once with a banking alert. The number barely changed. Student loans, rent, utilities. Numbers that didn't care about courage or dignity. For the first time since grad school, Naomi cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, exhausted tears for a life where intelligence had never been enough to outrun bias. For a world that demanded excellence from Black women and rewarded them with suspicion. For the fact that speaking the truth had cost her the only paycheck she had. By morning, reality showed its teeth. She applied for everything: executive assistant, front desk, translator, barista. She edited her resume so many times the words lost meaning. Automated rejection emails stacked up like receipts of failure. At 3:17 p.m., her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. It rang again. Then a voicemail. "Ms. Brooks, this is Lauren Mitchell, executive assistant to Richard Hale. Mr. Hale requests a meeting with you this afternoon at Hale Tower. Transportation will arrive in 15 minutes. Naomi's chest tightened. Her first thought wasn't opportunity. It was punishment. Men like Richard Hale didn't apologize. They retaliated. They sued. They erased people quietly. Her hands shook as she changed into the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black blouse and slacks that still smelled faintly of detergent and hope. The car waiting outside wasn't subtle. A black luxury sedan, engine idling like a threat. The ride downtown felt unreal. Glass buildings rose around them, reflecting a version of the city Naomi had never been invited into. When the elevator doors opened directly into the top floor of Hale Tower, her pulse hammered in her throat. Richard Hale stood with his back to her, looking out over Lake Michigan. His suit jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked human, tired. "Sit," he said without turning. Naomi didn't move. He turned, studying her with an intensity that felt invasive but different from before. There was no contempt now, only calculation. "You have a master's degree in linguistics," he said. "From Georgetown?" "Yes." "You lived abroad?" "Yes." "And last night you humiliated me." Naomi met his gaze. "You humiliated yourself." Silence stretched. Then unexpectedly, Richard exhaled. "You're right." The words hung in the air, strange and fragile. "I was arrogant," he continued. "I assumed intelligence had a uniform. I assumed you were what I wanted you to be. A black woman in an apron." Naomi said nothing. "I have a problem," Richard said. "A very large one." He slid a folder across the desk. Contracts, emails, notes scribbled in frustration. A $2 billion energy deal with a Middle Eastern consortium. My translators are failing. Nuance is being lost. Respect is being lost. The deal is collapsing. Naomi flipped through the pages. She saw it immediately. Idioms mistranslated, cultural signals ignored, the language of trust butchered into corporate English. "You need more than a translator," she said quietly. "You need someone who understands intent." Richard nodded. "That's why you're here." He slid a check toward her. $1 million. Naomi's breath caught. "That's a signing bonus," he said. "You'll earn more if we succeed. You'll fly with us tomorrow." She stared at the check, then back at him. "You insulted me. You got me fired. And now you're offering me a fortune." "I didn't get you fired," he said sharply. "Your manager did, and I corrected that. But yes, the irony is not lost on me." Naomi leaned forward. "Then here are my terms. I am not your assistant. I am not invisible. In any room I enter, I am treated as a professional. If I say stop, you stop." Richard studied her. Then slowly he smiled. "Agreed." Riyadh was heat and marble and power. The boardroom gleamed with wealth older than Richard's company. On the opposite side of the table sat Sheikh Omar al-Rashid and his sons, flanked by lawyers and a translator named Karim al-Fayed. From the first exchange, Naomi felt it. Something was wrong. Karim's translations were soft, too soft. He sanded down sharp demands, reshaped phrases, tilted meaning just enough to benefit someone else. Not Hale Industries, not the Sheikh. When the Sheikh spoke rapidly in Arabic, Naomi's stomach tightened. "He's proposing a compromise," Karim said in English. "Local labor, a symbolic gesture." Naomi's pen froze. That wasn't what he said. He said preferred subcontractor. Singular, specific, lucrative, a kickback hiding in plain sight. Naomi leaned toward Richard. "He's lying." Richard's eyes darkened. "How sure are you?" "Enough to bet everything." They stepped into a side room. Naomi spoke fast, adrenaline flooding her veins. "If we accuse him directly, we insult the Sheikh. We lose the deal. We expose him by making him contradict himself." Back in the room, Richard frowned at Naomi deliberately. "My advisor seems confused," he said. "Is this request binding?" Karim smiled, patronizing. "Of course not. Merely symbolic." Naomi waited. Then she spoke, not in formal Arabic, but in a sharp, confrontational dialect. "Mr. Al-Fayed," she said calmly, "I admired your paper on contractual deception, especially the section on disguising kickbacks as cultural gestures." The room went still. Karim's face drained of color. The Sheikh turned slowly. "Is this true?" Karim stammered. Naomi held his gaze, unblinking. Security escorted him out minutes later. Trust shattered, then rebuilt. The Sheikh laughed, deep and astonished. "This woman sees clearly," he said. "She will speak for you." The deal was signed 3 days later, better than anyone expected. On the flight home, Richard finally spoke. "You didn't just translate," he said. "You dismantled a predator." Naomi looked out the window. "I've been dismantling them my whole life. I just didn't always get paid for it." When they landed, Naomi paid off her loans in full. For the first time, she stood in a room built for power and belonged there. Naomi Brooks didn't celebrate right away. The day the money cleared, when her student loan balance dropped to zero and the screen flashed, paid in full, she didn't scream or call anyone. She sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the couch, and let the silence settle. It wasn't disbelief. It was relief so deep it felt like grief leaving the body. Years of tension loosened, the kind that Black women learn to carry without ever naming it. The next morning, Naomi walked into Hale Tower wearing a tailored navy suit she'd chosen herself. No borrowed confidence, no costume, just precision. People looked at her differently now, some with curiosity, some with respect. A few with something colder, resentment that didn't bother to hide. She noticed it all. Richard Hale stood when she entered his office. It wasn't performative this time. It was instinctive. "I've reviewed your proposal," he said. Naomi nodded. "Then you know I'm not asking for charity." Her proposal was simple and radical. A new division within Hale Industries Group, cultural strategy and global communications, with Naomi as a partner, not an employee. Authority written into contracts, decision-making power, and a commitment that extended beyond profit. "This division will train leaders to listen," Naomi had written, "not to translate words, but to understand people." Richard leaned back, eyes on the city. "You're asking me to change how this company thinks." "I'm asking you to stop pretending it already does," Naomi replied. He didn't argue. They announced the new division a week later. The press release was careful, corporate, clean. It didn't say Black woman who was fired for a drop of water now runs strategy. It said visionary leadership and global alignment. Naomi knew how these things worked. Still, when she stepped into the conference room filled with executives, mostly white, mostly male, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She spoke anyway. She spoke about contracts that failed because respect was never translated, about deals lost to arrogance disguised as efficiency, about the cost of underestimating people who don't look like power. When a senior vice president interrupted her, smiling, dismissive, Naomi held his gaze and waited. Silence stretched. He finished his sentence, flustered. "I wasn't done," she said calmly, "but now you are." The room shifted. Word traveled fast. Within months, Naomi's division became the place problems were sent when they refused to be solved the old way. Governments, corporations, NGOs, people came looking for someone who could hear what wasn't being said. Naomi built a team that looked like the world. Black, brown, white, immigrant, multilingual. People who had been told their perspectives were extra or soft. At night, Naomi still walked home sometimes. She liked the city when it wasn't trying to impress anyone. One evening, she passed Blackwood Prime. She paused. Stephen Caldwell stood outside, cigarette shaking in his hand. The restaurant had changed ownership after a quiet word from Hale Industries. Stephen looked older, smaller. "Naomi," he said, forcing a smile. "I wanted to apologize." She waited. "I was under pressure," he continued. "You know how it is." Naomi nodded once. "I do." She didn't accept his apology. She didn't reject it either. She simply walked away. Closure didn't need permission. Weeks later, Naomi stood in a lecture hall at Georgetown University. The plaque behind her read, "The Brooks Fellowship for Linguistics and Cultural Studies. Full scholarships, no debt. Priority for students whose brilliance had been overlooked." Richard sat in the front row. When Naomi finished speaking, the applause felt different. Earned, shared. A young Black woman approached her afterward, eyes bright and nervous. "I worked 2 jobs, she said. "I thought I'd never make it." Naomi smiled. "You will." That night, Richard found Naomi in her office. Lights low, city humming below. "My mother would have loved this," he said quietly. "She was a linguist. No one ever took her seriously." Naomi considered him. "Then honor her," she said, "by listening when the room gets uncomfortable." Richard nodded. The world didn't change overnight. Naomi knew that. Bias didn't evaporate because one woman broke through. But something had shifted. A door cracked open. A standard raised. Naomi Brooks had not just escaped invisibility. She had made it impossible to ignore others like her. And when people asked how she did it, she told the truth. "I stopped shrinking. and I demanded the room make space. Now I want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Did Naomi's journey change the way you think about power and prejudice? Do you believe speaking up can truly change someone's destiny? If this story moved you, comment 111 below. Tell us which country you're watching from, and please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.